Coming up next on Rugby Wrap-Up, Hook, Friday, Lewis and McCarthy talking Rugby World Cup and Saracens.
It's Johnny Wilkinson. He drops from goal. California. Tonga has beaten France.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Rugby Wrap-Up. Matt McCarthy and Steve Lewis in Midtown Manhattan talking rugby. Stephen, we just had a good time on the other side of the pond.
Yes, we did.
And we're still talking to one another.
And we only had one argument, so that's not too bad over about 6 days.
It's pretty good. For two old ladies staying together, traveling like that, and living in the same quarters.
The odd couple.
Yes. And we'd be remiss not to thank Mr. David Barry of the Ramblin' Jesters.
There's infinite hospitality and patience.
Much patience. But we are, speaking of patience, we have our two men calling in from overseas, Mr. George Hook and Mr. Mike Friday. George, welcome. You're in Dublin. Back home?
Yeah, sitting in my home in the den where all the finest rugby videos of my career were created.
We're going to welcome Mr. Mike Friday, who doesn't know whether he's coming or going, what time zone he's in. He just got off a plane from Japan. Mike, are you back in England?
I am for a few days and before flying on back into Camp San Diego. So boys are off this week. We're back at it in full on in prep for Dubai Sunday onwards.
So were you slowed down by all that parade traffic in England for the parade? Oh, they didn't have the parade. All right, gentlemen, let's get right into it. We're going to go through the World Cup a little bit, and then we're going to get into some other stuff after the break. But I wanted to start off with Mr. Steve Lewis, a question, because this is right in the Champagne socialist humanitarian wheelhouse that he lives in. Are Saya Khaleesi and Nelson Mandela forever now mentioned in the same breath?
Are you having a laugh?
No.
In the same breath. There's no comparison. One of them's captain of a sports team. The other spent 27 years in prison, 18 years in Robben Island, protesting the inhumanity and racism of apartheid South Africa. There's no comparison.
So your answer is no.
It would be no.
Well, but wait a minute. Hold on. There is some...
There's a connection. There's a connection, right? They are symbols. And actually one leads on from the other. For Mandela, it was about him embracing the sport of the oppressors, the white man's sport, just after the ANC came to power. For Khaleesi, it's an interesting, fine man that he is. It's not the same comparison, but he is the symbol of integration. So this team is the first integrated team. You know, there was a lot of opposition to quotas and the like from white South African society, but the team has gone there. It has a healthy, reflective complement of African players, black players, who played more than their fair part, and Khaleesi is that symbol. So what you have is the Rainbow Nation actually reflected in the team, as opposed to just the leader embracing Francois Pienaar, the Panzer tank commander.
And Matt Damon guy. George, you were the only one, I believe, out of the four of us.
Alive at the time.
Yeah. George, you were the only one of the four of us, if I'm not mistaken, that was at the 95 Cup. Is that not true? And if so, what is your take on this with Mandela and Khaleesi?
You mentioned them in the same breath because all of us in 95, what we hoped for, those of us like me who had been members of the Irish anti-apartheid movement, who hadn't been in South Africa, suddenly we saw a great new dawn. This World Cup was wonderful because South Africa won, and there were a healthy contingent of black players, as Steve talks about. And whilst I said South Africa were going to win, I wanted them to win. I am delighted they've won. But let's not dress it up in anything more than South Africa have won an international sporting tournament. It is nothing else but that.
Mike, let's switch over to the game itself. And George mentioned the word grim, and I'm going to kind of make light of it by saying it was a grim result for you, specifically since you flew all the way over to Japan. Did you fly business or coach?
I was in the front for once. It was all right, to be fair. Doesn't normally happen when we fly, but for once I managed to get myself in the front.
You will never want to fly again behind that curtain.
Well, I will be flying behind that curtain on Sunday, because that's what we do at USA Rugby. So,
I mean, in front of the curtain. But anyway, from a coaching standpoint, would Sinclair have made a difference?
I think, like, having been there and watching it live, there were a few things to note. I think South Africa changed the way they approached the game first 20 minutes, because they didn't play their brutal game. They played out the back and they went wide. And I think that disorientated England's D to start with. And then England made the adjustment, and then South Africa went to the brutality that they have in their forwards and their carrying. And I thought they were smart. I think what Sinclair would have done was he would have allowed England to probably get a little bit more movement in their own attacking patterns when they had opportunities, because of his ability to move the small pass, the simple pass. So I think he certainly has been one of England's cogs in their attacking game, especially in the tight carrying. And I think losing him blunted their attack. But look, we can't take anything away from South Africa's just never say die attitude defensively. They held England out for about 24, 25 phases on their own line, 5 yards out. It was monumental D. And I think, had Farrell slipped that kick over just after half time, in the stadium, you felt a little bit of a momentum shift, but he didn't nail it. And then 3 minutes later, Pollard nailed one the other end. And that was the final kind of change in momentum, which then allowed South Africa to kick on and finish the job. What stood out to me, is that actually when we talk about the South African team, we talk about the quotas. There's three elements to that. There's the white, there's the black, and then there's the coloured, which is recognised in South Africa as well. And there are quotas within quotas, and what you saw is a very unified team at all levels. And I think a hat tip to Erasmus in terms of how he's gone about that. And as everybody's alluded to, it is just they've won a sporting competition, but it can unite, it can inspire, it can bring a smile to a country and a population that is in desperate need of something.
Actually, what was interesting about it is it puts in perspective actually the other semi-final that Wales played. It makes that Wales result look really interesting. Maybe they're better suited playing against each other, but South Africa, we all picked England, as you say, which I got a lot of grief about. But on the day, South Africa better team, no question. Done and dusted.
One thing that we did here, and we might have been guilty of on this show, was saying how relieved England were not to have to face Wales. But on the other side of that, we missed the boat in not saying how relieved South Africa would be in not facing New Zealand. Right? I mean, that had to be an uplifting thing for them in the clubhouse. But George, did Eddie Jones F up this World Cup for England by going with the two Fs, Ford and Farrell, against the center-strong Springboks? Easy for me to say.
I don't know how you can even suggest that. I think the best fly half in the entire World Cup was George Ford. I mean, it depends what you believe in this game. I'm a bit of a Victorian in that I believe it's actually since Webb Ellis picked the ball up at rugby school a couple of 100 years ago, it's actually a passing game, and I want to see the ball passed. I thought Ford did a magnificent tournament. I think Farrell's a very good centre. If you think England lost this game because they were poor defensively, then you miss the boat entirely. The reason England lost this game is they were tactically outthought and outfought entirely by Erasmus.
All right, but George, you did say on this show that you actually lauded Eddie Jones for not starting Ford against Australia because of the matchup. And in this particular game, Ford was yanked.
Yeah, but hold on. How is Jones going to win the game? You got to think about if you're Eddie Jones. How is he going to win the game? He certainly wasn't going to win the game if he picked largely a conservative kicking fly half in the shape of Farrell. Farrell is obsessive. He's strong. He's got a huge discipline. He's got great concentration, but he doesn't have the kind of flair that Ford brings to the game. If England were to win this, they had to open up South Africa.
Well, I think the original question was about the coaching, right? So George was a coach of some repute. Mike is a coach. I am a coach. And, the coach that wins is a genius. All the other coaches in the tournament are Muppets. So I think, to focus on that selectorial decision, I think is also a nonsense. So in a much shorter, briefer version.
Mike, can you please come in
Nonsense.
and make it a threesome here for me on the nonsense that I'm spewing?
Well, the reality for me is, and I harped on about this before the competition started, he should have had Cipriani there. Because Cipriani could have unlocked a defence with 20 minutes to go. Cipriani unlocked South Africa in South Africa and won the game for England. And that's where the best fly half in the country was still in the UK. The best attacking fly half in the country was still in the UK. Now, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but it does come down to impact finishers, if that's what you want to call them, and being able to accommodate difficult personalities if it's going to help you win a World Cup. And, I was sceptical about not having Danny Cipriani in that 31, maybe for squad reasons, etc. But I think they're all professional rugby players, and you've got to recognise the skills that certain players have. And Cipriani can play on the back foot. He can unlock things. He can make things out of nothing. And 20 minutes to go, George Ford was yanked. And what did they need on the bench? They needed somebody that could either win a game because they were only going to lose it. And I think that's what Danny Cipriani would have done and what a fit Danny Kerr would have done.
Stephen, the Rugby World Cup in Japan, the crowds, the dollars generated versus the typhoon and the cancellations. If there were a reset button and World Rugby were able to say yay or nay on Japan, should they have gone to Japan again?
Oh, absolutely. Massive, unadulterated success from any criteria. I think fan attendance, TV views, digital views, all of the above. And in fact, they made a profit. In fact, they made, I read, £165 million. England made £150 million. That's profit in addition to all the guarantees. So this has turned out to be a masterstroke, one of the very few by World Rugby, and to be commended for having done it. I was there for 2 weeks, had a fantastic time. I thought it was a superb tournament. Great decision.
George, Eddie Jones, should he be fired?
No.
Mike?
No.
Stephen?
No.
Fair enough. All right, watch this.
If you're in New York City and want to watch some great rugby, have some great food, and some great times, go to the world's best rugby pub, the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street.
All right, we're back. Gentlemen, let's switch over to professional rugby, and let's talk about what's in the news this week with Saracens. Mike, you are right in London. You're in England. You're right in the center of the storm. Let me read this quote from The Guardian, our buddy Martin Pengelly's publication. Stephen, you have something to say about that, don't you?
It's a good liberal rag. Read it every day.
Okay. Here it is. The enormous season-wrecking points penalty is set in the rules for a breach of over £650,000 in a salary cap year. The financial penalty is £3 for every £1 over the $350,000 permitted, suggesting Saracens were paying their players £1.7 million over it altogether. Steve, just walk us through what's actually gone on here.
Sure. Well, what this is in American terms is a salary cap violation. So the Premiership has a salary cap. It's I believe it's 5, and it works out to about 7 total with academy and what have you. But each club is required to perform under that. So you can't play players more than that. This is for competitive equity. It's a very useful device the world over to keep balance going and to keep costs down, player costs specifically. Saracens, it's the not so dirty secret. Everyone's known for a while. They have been accused of stockpiling players, and the way they've been able to do it are what's called co-investments, whereby the chairman, Nigel Ray, and Saracens have invested jointly in companies with players to give them additional income, which they claim is not part of a salary cap. Right. The Premiership has now found, or an independent board has found, that it is. They've been found in breach of the salary cap requirement, and they've been fined the $5 million and deducted the points.
Mike, after the Rugby World Cup loss, how does Mark McCall handle his stars with this news in the locker room?
I mean, if this is upheld, this is huge because looking at the last couple of seasons, they're relegated because it's been so tight at the bottom, and to have I think they're 29 points behind or something now. It's colossal, and I think Mark McCall's probably, I don't know what he's thinking. I mean, he certainly has the most talented squad with those international players coming in, but they won't be available for him for at least 3 or 4 weeks. So to say they're in a crisis situation is an understatement.
Do you try to tell the guys, okay, hey guys, we're up against it. It's us versus them, and you can't give them any rest from the World Cup. You got to get right back into it.
Well, it hasn't got a choice. I think there's a set rest period. I mean, these player welfare will come first, and that will be dictated by the RPA, and it will be in the agreements, the EPS agreements between England Rugby and Premiership Rugby. So I'll be surprised if these boys are allowed to play within in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
George, as an American, I'm looking at £1.7 million for a professional team with the salary cap. That doesn't even get you a lefty reliever for 1 out in American professional sports.
The reality is, how can you have a salary cap in professional sports? So in other words, you tell Tiger Woods, don't win 82 tournaments in your career. You can only win 40 tournaments because then you've earned too much money. So the whole purpose of professional sport is that the money shows your talent. The guy with the most money is essentially the best. Now, I saw firsthand in county cricket in England how they paid the players, but that was for taxation reasons. Now, all you have to do is to walk down the city of London and find the best lawyers and the best accountants that money can buy and say to them, listen, we're a rugby club and we want to pay the guys more money than we're actually allowed. Can you give us a legal way of doing that? And I'm pretty certain that's what Saracens did. Like, it goes against everything. So you turn around and say, you hire some kid and you say, kid, you join this company, but you can never earn more than $30,000 a year, no matter how good you are. This goes against everything that professionalism stands for.
You got Steve Lewis with a harumph.
You're absolutely right. It's one of the great ironies, right, of the free market and capitalist system. The American sport like this is actually very, very socialist in this regard. A slightly different point is that that this is a boys' club, right? So there are 13 votes in the Premiership, and there are no tears shed right now over Saracens being hammered like this. There are 12 other owners who want this to happen. So you've got to remember that. It's a boys' club where they set the rules, they agree the rules. Saracens broke the rules, they get caught. That's where we are.
There's another side of this as well, and again, it comes from a quote from The Guardian. Let me read it to you. Without Nigel Ray and his loyal backing over 25 years, the club would not exist as a professional entity. Europe would have never broken the mold in terms of their remarkable team culture. And there would not have been developed so many England internationals, never blazed a trail for English clubs in Europe, and never broken the mold in terms of their remarkable team culture.
Yeah, but you don't need to cheat to do it.
Also,
that's the argument right now. Have they cheated?
Well, I think also as well, we're talking about the 12 other owners. You talk about they all want it to happen. There's probably 6 or 7 of them just having a quick phone call with their accountants and lawyers.
Yep, of course.
Make sure that their legal fiddle's on point. The other thing is if we're going to have a capped salary market, it's got to be the same across the world. I don't see that going on in the top 14. I mean, there's talks of Montpellier coming in with a transfer fee for Cobus Reinhardt of nearly €600,000. So, I think if we're going to allow the free market to operate, and if Nigel Ray wants to spend all his money on players and that's how it is, then that's how it should be. I think that's what happens in soccer, and Manchester City can buy anybody they like. And it means that certain clubs have to find their way and see where they exist and fit within in the system. So, what's
the outcome going to be, Mike?
I I wouldn't be surprised if there's some deduction in the in the fine and the points. And I do agree with Steve is that it's been found so-called of massaging the rules. The extreme words are cheating. But I think the reality is I think something has to change. Is either we are in a fully professional, commercial, free market for the players, or we're not. And if that's the case, then that has to be governed across the world. It can't just be specified to one geography, and then the top 14 can do as they like, and they can do what they like in the Super 15.
This also comes under cautionary tales. There are other leagues that this is going to be an issue for. Once the salary cap, I'm talking a little bit closer to home, and if the salary cap is not enforced, and the genie's out the bottle, it is very hard to put it back in. So,
and this comes from your experience in professional rugby in the United States, because you are actually the director of rugby for 5 professional teams on American soil.
That was different because we owned every team, so we could control costs. So,
and how did that go?
Not very well.
That's the problem here. You had this
actually from that perspective, it went well, but there are other issues, obviously. But the salary cap, if you're an owner, you want it because theoretically it keeps your costs down. That's all well and good when the league is competitive. But as one team races ahead, egos want to catch up, or someone gets hammered and humiliated, they don't want to be at the bottom of the table. That's when you get people cheating a little bit, and that's when the rules get bent or massaged, however Mike wants to put it.
Yeah, and that collision's going to happen in Major League Rugby, and we're almost out of time, but I want to give George a minute here on this one. George, capitalism or the continued socialism in rugby for it to survive?
Well, I told you South Africa will win the World Cup. I told you Japan would do well. And I'm telling you now, Saracens are going to win this argument, because the argument of the professional clubs is actually unsustainable if Saracens have done their homework. And I cannot believe they haven't done their homework. As far as I'm concerned, the best professional gets paid the most money. And that's why Jeremy Corbyn is not going to win the election with his newfangled idea of taxing anybody who can make a few shillings. It goes against the whole theory, and it's why the Berlin Wall came down. You cannot have socialism will not work, comrade.
All right, well, I gotta throw a plug for our man David Barry, because he's in that forensic legal realm, and I think either Saracens or the Premiership should hire BlackRock and David Barry. Right before we go, guys, in 30 seconds, give me something that you're looking forward to this weekend in rugby. Mike, you're on the hot seat.
Mine's close to home. I'm looking forward to watching my 2 boys play for their school team before I get back to work in San Diego. Trinity, Hurstmere Point, Saturday, 11 a.m., 2:30 p.m. is getting on.
Just like in Rugby X, you're pushing the laws, you're pushing the rules. All right, you'll get away with that, because I didn't tell you specifically that it had to be in the professional realm. Stephen, in the professional realm of rugby, because I know that you would say watching me play old boys was going to be the focus of your attention.
I've never been in the top 100. Actually, what I'm looking forward to is getting back to one of my teams. That's the Army Women are playing Quinnipiac this Saturday in the semi-final of the Naira Championship. They've had a great year, 7-1. Going great guns. Hopefully win this Saturday and on to the final.
No irony, they're going great guns in their Army.
You like that?
I like Don't Wink at Me Ever Again. George, let's finish with you, my friend.
I think what I'm not looking forward to it at all, because we are back now. We're back to this nonsense competition called the Pro 14 or something, in which half-assed teams with put out a B team or whatever. It is utterly meaningless.
But won't the South African teams have a little pep in their step for you, George? Won't they have that, that effect?
Well, the Cheetahs think
going well.
They may well be, but the other team are no good, and they wouldn't knock the skin off a custard. The Welsh teams, and it's a miracle. I don't know how Wales do so well when their club sides are so awful. And it's just not a good competition, and it's just a pretense that, we've got another competition, and we haven't.
So what you're saying is you're looking forward to the Leinster match?
No, what I'm saying is, like Mr. Friday, I'm going to be watching my grandsons play real rugby on Saturday.
Fair enough. And I'm going to be watching the Gents of New York from the sideline with a cold beer, and they're going to try to get me in the game, and I'm not doing it. But we've also, just to leave you folks with some quotes, we've got, if I'm not mistaken, Bugger's Muddle and Skin Off a Custard. Google those, and we'll get back to you. On that note, I want to thank Mr. George Hook.
It's late over here, It's okay for you tea time Americans.
That's right. And Mr. Mike Friday. Just flew in from Japan, and boy, are his arms tired. And Mr. Stephen Lewis, the Champagne Socialist. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. And on that note, thank you for joining us. Much appreciated. I'm Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan for these gentlemen and Rugby Wrap-Up. Signing off till next time.